Hello, this is Joseph Meckling, and this is a critique of the National Park Service Mid-2000s project in the South Unit of the Badlands National Park in South Dakota. We are going to be analyzing the General Management Plan, or the GMP, and its Environmental Impact Statement from the lens of a Social Impact Assessment, or SIA, as the EIA and SIA documents for this project share many similarities. So this is what this poorly rendered image of the Badlands National Park. It is kind of comes out of nowhere in South Dakota. South Dakota is commonly associated, like other Midwest and Great Plains states, as being quite flat and empty, but this park is quite the opposite, looking much more like a mountain state like Colorado or Montana, with its buttes just kind of coming out of nowhere from the Great Plains. So a little bit of history and background on the Badlands National Park. It's located in southwestern South Dakota, fairly close to Rapid City. It was established as Badlands National Monument all the way back in 1939, but took nearly 40 years before it was classified as a national park in 78. The land has historically been inhabited by the Oglala Sioux tribe, who happened to co-manage the park alongside the National Park Service, which is kind of a very unique benefit to the park and this partnership with the Sioux tribe. The unique name of the Badlands National Park, it comes from both the French and Wakotan words for badland or badland to travel through. So back in 1999, as they were heading into the new millennium, the National Park Service determined that changes had to be made in the South Unit of the Badlands in order to better improve the visitor experience while maintaining its cultural heritage. You'll see in a map later on that kind of is an outline of the entire park. The South Unit is much more rural, kind of a little bit more underdeveloped. As such, the visitor experience was more catered to more camping and other more of a wildlife experience, as well as maintaining, again, the cultural heritage of the Oglala tribe. This land, it is near a reservation, and the Oglala and other tribes are very active, as seen by the Oglala and the Bureau of Indian Affairs, coming together alongside the National Park Service to authorize the development of a General Management Plan, or GMP, that would reevaluate the park's needs and set out goals for future development heading into the new millennium. It took quite a bit of time. There were some hiccups here and there, particularly in 2002. But once the Bureau of Indian Affairs got in alongside, the development of the General Management Plan and the Environmental Impact Statement, or referred to as the South Unit GMP/EIS, would officially begin development in 2006. So the process went about this. The notice of intent was published in 2007, and the National Park Service drafted two letters in the newsletters in the winter of 2008 and spring of 2009 to provide the public the opportunity to learn more about the ambitions of the management project and to comment on the park and what they wish to see out of the project, what their concerns were. The National Park Service would also publish a document that was actually respondent of these comments in 2009. It is a very long document, roughly 20-30 pages, that it responds to many comments. Many comments they received were around the same lens, but they published this document responding to these comments back in 2009. And they published the Draft Environmental Impact Statement, or DEIS, in 2010, which also featured a comment period of 60 days. And they published a final environmental impact statement in 2012, which it also had a comment period of 30 days. So there was this public comment period throughout the project. The notice of intent is intended to allow the public the opportunity to comment on issues of their concerns about the potential project, allowing those involved to consider these comments in their planning process. The notice of intent particularly noted that comments are invited on the practical utility of the information being gathered, the accuracy of the burden hour estimate, ways to enhance the quality, utility, and clarity of the information to be collected, and ways to minimize the burden to respondents, including use of automated information collection techniques or other forms of information technology. The Park Service provided the public for more information on the EIS in those two newsletters earlier mentioned. And these newsletters, again, provide more detail on what the GMP was planning to do for the park, questions they intended to answer, and provide answers to questions they perceived would need to be asked. They began receiving comments from both newsletters, and the NPS published that document featuring comments from above. And as mentioned, the draft environmental impact statement had a 60-day comment period, while the final had a 30-day comment period. The draft detailed 7 management options that were being considered, including a no action alternative and 3 other alternatives, with alternative D being the preferred alternative. So this preferred alternative, it is to promote the understanding of the Oglala Sioux history, culture, and land management principles through education and interpretation. Visitor activities will be focused in a developed front country area that will provide a variety of services and amenities around the perimeter, while the interior of the South Unit will be managed as backcountry. Natural resource management would focus on survey and research to provide data to support future restoration, interpretation, and educational activities. Cultural resource management would focus on protection and preservation of historic, spiritual, and ceremonial sites and materials. And right here is that map I mentioned earlier of the South Unit and the North Unit, and where it relates to within the state of South Dakota as a whole, a very large swath of land. So the publishment of the final EIS and GMP, the FEIS provides greater detail into those 7 management options and the 4 alternatives and the elements active in them all. There are dedicated sections within each of the sections detailing the alternatives that seem to be intended to answer questions from the comment period, questions concerned with how the GMP would impact cultural and natural resources, as well as the overall visitor experience, among other things. There was extensive detail done on the impacts to minority populations and low-income populations with methodologies for analyzing these effects provided. And the final chapter of the final impact statement is entirely dedicated to the process that led up to the FEIS's publishing, those being the scoping process, public participation, and tribal consultation. These processes are all key aspects of social impact assessments, which will be analyzed further. So now we're going to shift to more of the critique of the GMP, but more so regarding societal impacts and the measures the GMP has taken to mitigate them. There are 6 aspects we will be critiquing: the qualifications of those doing the assessment, the data collection, the analysis of the predicted social impact, the public involvement, the mitigation strategies, and lastly, the monitoring strategies. So the qualifications, given that the project is led by a federal agency, particularly the National Park Service, which is one of the most well-funded and well-regarded research agencies in the federal government, one would assume that this agency would have the best social impact assessors available. Whether it's social scientists or environmental scientists, the NPS should have access to the best researchers with experience in performing social impact assessments as well as environmental impact assessments. Additionally, as mentioned, the Oglala tribe and other Native American groups are heavily involved in this project, which gives it a unique sense of being able to gather the right information, whether it's getting adequate public participation or knowledge on potential environmental and social impacts that agency representatives might not be aware of. There is a full list of the preparers that can be found on pages 342 and 344 of the final impact statement. As for data collection, the methodology the assessors used, the data was collected largely based on information from NPS experts, park stats, professional judgment, and a review of existing literature and studies. Each area of potential impact had its definitions and terms. Each of these resources is shown to have different impacts based on the various alternatives. The resources considered were the following: natural, paleontological, soundscape, cultural, these being archaeological and museum collection related, ethnographic, scenic, visitor experience, socioeconomic impacts, and park operations. What was considered for each alternative were the unavoidable adverse impacts, the irreversible and irretrievable commitment of resources, and the relationship between short-term uses and long-term productivity. For the consideration of ethnographic and socioeconomic data, it was collected in consultation with tribal organizations. The NPS and other tribal organizations held scoping meetings in surrounding communities around 2000 to the year 2000 to identify the public's concerns about issues facing the park. The planning team, composed of NPS staff and Oglala Sioux tribe members, then developed statements regarding the park's purpose and significance based in part on these scoping comments. However, one thing that the document lacks is truly transparent data, that being data that can be seen in the documents outside of an appendix table. You usually want to see tables, graphs, and other forms of data written out loud onto the document rather than just being hidden into appendices. The pages 211 and 216 of the FEIS detail the response to concerns and coordination efforts with other agencies and concerned parties. While I do not deny the validity of the results that are briefly discussed in this resource section, outside of the cost comparison of the alternatives and the appendices found in the final environmental impact statement, there are no available tabulation of the FEIS documentation. For the comparative analysis of the predicted social impacts, under normal SIA assessing circumstances, a comparative diachronic model would have been useful in analyzing predicted social impacts. However, no national park is similar regarding both its geographical and environmental features and its contributing societal features. However, NPS management of their national parks all follow similar guidelines. Much of the comparative analysis done in the GMP that I was able to find is focused on environmental impacts, with the compared quote-unquote community being the north unit of the Badlands National Park and the nearby Buffalo Gap National Grassland, which can be seen in that photo. From an SIA comparative analysis perspective, this project does a relatively poor job of fulfilling its intended obligations. Without a comparative analysis of similar projects for the public to view and critique, the results can be held to scrutiny. It is possible that a comparative analysis of other NPS projects was done, but given that it was not made publicly available through these documents, it is hard to assess the results properly. And again, these results can still be accurate, but it's hard to tell without it being written in Word. As for public involvement, as I mentioned throughout the entire planning process, the NPS allowed the public ample opportunity to be involved in the project. This is evident from the very beginning of the project as the NPS works alongside the Oglala Sioux tribe in devising a management plan and hosting public events alongside each other. This inclusion of a community in which the land being operated on is significant, is valuable, and allows for important voices to be heard. Additionally, members of the Oglala can better communicate with fellow tribe members and other individuals within the community than the National Park Service. While NPS is a well-intended government agency of capable employees on the project, they are not in the community like the Oglala are and can be viewed in a more indifferent or even negative light by community members as opposed to members of the Oglala. Therefore, the Oglala might be more capable of reaching community members and leading them to attend public participation events and even sway opinions in favor of the project. Newsletters were published to the public, which encouraged public comment, and responses to these comments were published in a large document available to the public. This comment process response document served to answer these questions and as a research for the public to learn more about the project and the NPS's mission. Additionally, the draft and final EISs were made available to the public, and within it, well documented the availability for public comment. Overall, the public was encouraged to be involved in the project, and project planners considered their concerns, and some were even implemented into the draft and final environmental impact statements. For the mitigation strategies, the goal of the GMP was to preserve and maintain the Badlands National Park's South Unit's mission of protecting the spectacular scenery, the large concentration of mixed grass prairie, and numerous wildlife species, as well as safeguarding the historical significance of the land for the Oglala Sioux people. Due to the project being more of an improvement of the South Unit, the project itself serves as a mitigation for the park as a whole. These improvements to the South Unit have positioned the park in a much better spot to fulfill its mission and mitigate and outright prevent issues that could arise. Managing alongside the law and having a robust public comment process allows for additional perspectives and creates the opportunity to tackle challenges before they occur. The project also has multiple alternatives to the plan, which creates the opportunity to account for numerous issues that could be mitigated with each alternative strategy. This preservation of land limits both environmental and social consequences that can come from excessive redevelopment and is a prime example of the mitigation techniques used by the NPS. This can be shown in an example of preferred alternative 4, which mentions approximately 90% of land within the park would be designated as a natural area and recreational zones. These zones would include primitive campgrounds, backcountry patrol and equestrian facilities, and access by unpaid pedestrian and horseback riding trails. Approximately 10% of lands would be designated as a development zone. And as for monitoring strategies, the NPS is actively encouraging public participation in the monitoring process. Not only does this allow for a constant reception of the state of the park, but also keeps the public involved and thus leads to greater trust between the public and the agency. In quote from the final impact statement, natural and cultural resources are continually being impacted or threatened from inside and outside the park. How would a park protect these resources while accommodating an appropriate range of visitor uses? What is the best style of management for the South Unit? What is the best way to include the Oglala Sioux tribe in the management of the South Unit? And what changes might be necessary to most effectively and efficiently operate and manage the South Unit? Continuing monitoring the economic and environmental impacts of this project's improvements with the right tactics, such as this community involvement, is crucial. So, how the general management plan relates to international social assessment principles. There are 6 international social environment impact assessment principles. Principle 1 is to achieve extensive understanding of local and regional settings to be affected by the action program policy. As the NPS is managing the South Unit of the Badlands National Park and has been doing so for decades and doing so alongside the Oglala tribe, there should be a considerable amount of knowledge by both parties on the setting and how different management tactics might have certain negative consequences. Principle 2, which is the focus on key elements of the human environment. A key focus of the social impact assessment is finding ways to improve the visitor experience while maintaining the park's environmental integrity and cultural significance. Through the collaboration of the Oglala and public participation, I believe the NPS does a good job at crafting something that works to achieve this principle. Principle 3 being to identify methods and assumptions and define significance. I believe the NPS could do a better job of displaying their methods and communicating the significance of their methods and findings. While commemoration must be had for the effort that the NPS had in making sure to allow for public participation and comment, that does not do much if people struggle with understanding the data presented. Principle 4 is to provide quality information for use in decision making. Each alternative provided for public comment, and they do a relatively good job of providing information necessary for how they decided on which alternatives to consider and which alternative they ultimately decide to choose. Each alternative is described in detail with careful consideration of the potential impacts to the environment, the cultural impacts, and the impacts to broader society. Principle 5 is to ensure that any environmental justice issues are fully described and analyzed. Thanks to the unique role of the Oglala tribe, as in this project and the management of the South Unit, they have the expertise necessary to inform those at the top, that being NPS, regarding managing this project of potential environmental justice issues and lead to these being mitigated or prevented in the first place. Lastly, Principle 6 is to undertake evaluation and monitoring and mitigation. As this is a national park being maintained by both the NPS and the Oglala tribe, ongoing monitoring and evaluation will occur. Additionally, as the park is one of the more well-visited national parks, public comment referencing the state of the park will continue and prove to be beneficial. So as for assessment in terms of its social impact perspective, on a A+ to F scale, I'm going to give this a B grade. While I do believe this document does a great job of listing out the reasoning behind the South Unit's changes, the detailing of the project, and the prospective impacts at both environmental and societal levels, I believe there is still something missing from this SIA. More considerations of the societal impacts of the project beyond the cultural and historical effects on the Oglala tribe or impacts on the visitor experience. While all these examples are important, there should have been more done, particularly from an economic and environmental health perspective. I would have liked to see more in mitigation and monitoring efforts. A major positive of this document is the robust public participation aspect, which one could reasonably argue is the most important part of any SIA, not just one of this nature that involves such crucial land to an entire culture. This EIS shares many features of SIA. This is a terrific environmental impact statement, but I believe it is lacking in some societal impacts. A B grade is a good grade and is good enough to account for potential societal impacts. However, an agency of the NPS's side should be able to do just a bit more. They should be held to a higher standard, and I believe they should have done more. Here are some references. And thank you very much for listening and learning more about the state of the South Unit National Park.